Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Phillips. I'm super grateful you're here. I'm a master's level clinician and a relationship and attachment trauma coach. I help freedom-seeking women regain their confidence, master their triggers, and communicate their needs so they can finally put an end to toxic relationships, low self-worth, feeling like an imposter, and become more authentic, trusting, and secure. I know exactly what it feels like to be spinning in circles, stuck in obsession, and living life with all or nothing thinking. After years of failed relationships, impulsive decisions, yo-yo dieting, and riding emotional roller coasters, I knew I needed to get to the root of my issues and that I couldn't go on like this any longer. And that's exactly why I created the 10-week Secure Self-Coaching Program. I was tired of wasting time and money on professionals that didn't understand me. And I knew that trying to fix my own problems with the same thinking that got me there wasn't going to help me get any closer to my goals. If this sounds like you, feel free to send me a message and we'll set up a free consultation call to see if my program is right for you. You can find the link to my website in the show notes. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips. Super excited to have my friend Dan Griffin back on the show. Dan is an internationally recognized author, thought leader, and expert on men's relationships and masculinity. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Jess, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
I'd like to say by popular demand, but maybe not.
Listen, just tell yourself whatever you need to tell yourself, you know? So like, let's just be honest to the audience. So Dan and I have been chatting for like 15 minutes before we hit record, and there was some good stuff. There was some
good stuff.
Some good stuff.
There was some stuff immediately for the delete button.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about today's episode. We have decided we're just going to go with the flow, but Dan just crushed a workout and I've had too much coffee. So here we are, here we are. But yes. No, in all seriousness, I really appreciated you coming on last time and our conversation. And I find it so interesting because, as we were speaking before, a lot of my business was originally built off of helping and supporting women. And in the past year or two, I've had more and more men join my coaching practice. And just kind of having you on and the way that you think and the way that you've helped men in the past puts a really good kind of spin and addition to the work that I do. And last time you were on, we went some places, but we definitely did not have enough time to go to open up some other doors. So I thought today would be a perfect opportunity to just really, as I was mentioning to you earlier, I work with a lot of women, well, men too, but women, for example, who have had difficult experiences in relationships and with dating, and I coach a lot of them on how to get prepared to get back into the dating scene. But I thought you and I could talk a lot about maybe some of those misconceptions about, how some men, let me preface that, some men think about women and how some women think about men. So yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of a male perspective on codependency, toxic relationships, dating and sobriety, things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's like 8 podcasts.
It's going to be a 3-hour episode. You said you had nothing to do after.
I don't. Where do you want to start? Because that's a lot. It's all good stuff. I think you've probably heard this, but like in recovery, you sometimes talk about like what happens when an alcoholic gets into a relationship can be likened to 2 garbage trucks colliding.
I told you guys. This is just going to be a wild episode with me.
But the truth is, look, I mean, that was me. I mean, I can't speak for anybody else. It's not meant to be insulting or judgmental, but it's kind of like, there's a reason why we encourage people to not be in a relationship right away. And it's like people are so lonely and they want relationships and they're horny and they want sex and there's all this stuff. And the guys that I work with, there's all this like, oh, I want a relationship, or at least I want to get laid. And I'm like, they can be 2 different things, I mean, you can, but I said, the idea of the garbage truck is like when we get into recovery and long into our sobriety, there's a lot of toxic stuff that we've internalized, that we've taken on, that we carry with us, that in many ways it's kind of made us who we are. And we
Mhm.
think it's part of our personality. We think it's part of what makes us cool
Mhm.
and all that sort of stuff. And it can be just a real relationship ruiner. And a lot of that, I think, is driven by gender and gender expectations and gender conditioning that runs so incredibly deep. I mean, I'm constantly like with guys coming into newly into sobriety, it's kind of like this thing of like, before you get into a relationship, why don't we like talk a little bit about like what is a relationship even to you?
Mhm.
And before you start having sex, which fine, you want to have sex,
Mhm.
but can you do it with integrity?
Mm.
Can you do it with honesty? And do you even have a sense of what healthy sexuality is for you?
Right.
Like, have you ever stopped and just taken the time to really define that,
Right.
for yourself and what that looks like? And so, relationships don't cure loneliness. Let's
Mm.
be really clear about that, right? So people are lonely, they get into recovery, they can't use their substances or whatever it is they're in recovery for, and they immediately want somebody, it's like, I'm miserable. Please share my misery with me or fix me. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, that's not a relationship. And another person has never cured the loneliness of another person. I really truly believe that.
And do you think that that's specific to just people in recovery, or would you say
No, no, no,
just
no, no.
across the board?
I just across the board. It's
Yeah.
just that we think the solution to loneliness is people,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's the case. I think the solution to loneliness is looking within and realize. Because how often do you hear people say, "I could be lonely
In a room full of people.
in a room full of people, in a room full of friends,
Yeah.
and I
Family.
could be lonely"? Well, then it obviously has nothing to do with other people. So there you go. There's our start. What do you think?
I wanted to see how long you were gonna go and be serious for, with, like, hiding the giggles underneath. No, it's great, it's great. So, I'm interested, do you when you hear the term codependency, we were talking a little bit about this before and that you have a chapter in your book on codependency and you've written an article. When you hear the term codependent, do you think more that that's something that women openly talk about, or do you find equal amount of men discussing that idea as well?
It's a feminized concept. So look, the concept of codependency has essentially been a feminized concept, right? So I mean, for the longest time, we didn't even talk about the idea. It really was a feminized concept. Melody Beatty came out when she talked about it. She really wasn't talking about it for men.
Mhm.
The concept of codependency was created as a result of kind of alcoholic relationships and
Mhm.
looking at kind of what happens to people in those relationships. And they were often talking about male alcoholics and women. Fast forward, it's really, really clear men struggle with codependent behaviors as much as women do. I have
Mhm.
absolutely no question about it. How it manifests and what it looks like is different, usually because those behaviors are coming through a gender lens.
Mm.
They're coming
Mhm.
through and that's what my article in the chapter that I wrote in my second book, A Man's Way Through Relationships, that's what I kind of really talk about, because it doesn't necessarily look like codependency sometimes. And for some men, it's classic. It's the
Mm.
classic symptoms or the classic example of like codependency and codependent behaviors that you associate with women. And I can't
Hmm.
tell you how many men over the years I've known who have read Melody Beatty's books and been like, oh my God, like this totally hits
That's
it. And yet
me,
at
yeah.
the same time, like there was a book, I think sadly it's out of print, but it's called Up Against the Wall. And it was written by two men specifically about men's codependency.
Hmm.
And so like that really hasn't caught on because men think of it as a feminized concept. They think of it for women. And I think for even some men, it's like the idea of them being codependent somehow means like they're less of a man or their
Yeah.
masculinity is challenged.
Yeah.
Um, but when you scratch
Yeah.
beneath the surface, I have yet to meet a man, especially a man in recovery, who doesn't struggle deeply with codependent behaviors.
Right. And if I were to ask you just kind of off the top of your head, like, what would be your go-to definition of codependency?
Well, I think there's there's different ways to talk about it. I think the chronic neglect of self in
Mm,
favor of a relationship.
mm,
Chronic neglect of self in favor or deference to a relationship. And I think, there are people who exhibit codependent tendencies, and then
mm,
there are people who are full fledged kind of living with serious codependency. And so I think it happens on a continuum.
mm,
And so, like, I think any relationship, there's going to be times where I sacrifice my self care, even to
mhm,
some degree, for my partner or
mhm.
in that relationship, especially like when you have like terminal illness or somebody who's really sick or, something along those lines.
Yeah,
So it can be periodic, and it personally doesn't concern me. But when it's habitual, when it's
yeah,
really consistent, when you see it in multiple relationships.
yeah. Yeah, I like that chronic piece added too, right? Because everything is on a spectrum. Even, there's countless people that will come to me and say, "Do you think I'm a narcissist?" Right? And I say, first of all, a narcissist would never ask me if I thought that they were a narcissist, right?
Yes,
But I think on a spectrum, right, we can exhibit narcissistic traits, and some maybe more than others. And I completely agree with codependency, right? If it is this chronic idea of I cannot be okay unless I'm in full control of this relationship or over your mood or over your actions, and I'm completely destabilized until you're stabilized, then yeah, we have a chronic issue. But I think at the same time, like what you're talking about, that idea of compromise, and like what is healthy compromise? When can I put your needs in front of my needs? And again, that comes down to like effective communication and respect for each person, but without the added, I mean, we're all going to do stuff in relationships, in friendships with our coworkers that we don't necessarily want to do, but that added piece of the resentment not being there, or letting that resentment build and the person not being able to talk about it or stand up for themselves and just being a yes person and saying yes to everything. I think that's when that issue becomes chronic.
absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is that like when it comes to relationships, a lot of men, maybe most men, have been conditioned not to know how to take care of themselves in a relationship. And so
Can you expand on that?
we focus a lot on how women show up in relationships.
Hmm.
But I mean, when it comes to creating true intimacy and
Hmm.
connection, and you want to have a healthy relationship, that's like completely outside of male conditioning. Men are
Hmm.
conditioned to, it's these man rules that I talk about, and it's, these rules that we follow to be men. But I mean, like, if you think of like what are some of the core rules, men don't cry, men are not emotional other than anger, men use sex to cover for intimacy, men
Hmm.
always win, men are always fixing things. I mean, it's like, name me
Yeah.
one of those that's a success
Yeah.
for a relationship. And then we, ask men to show up in relationships and use these tools that they don't necessarily have, or skills that they haven't practiced. And then we
Hmm.
are, confused as to why they struggle, or revert back to the kind of things that they have known.
Hmm.
And so, that's what I talk to a lot of guys about, and women about. I'm like, look, you can't, the analogy I use is, you can't go into a relationship with somebody who's asking you to speak French fluently
Hmm.
when you've never taken a class in
Hmm.
French or France. You could take a
Or
class in France.
friends.
I mean, if it's a French class. Um,
Why
but
not?
I mean, like, that's kind of the idea. And so it's like, how do you learn to do that? And I mean, I look at myself. I had the greatest desire for intimacy and connection than anybody, and I constantly failed in my relationship with my partner.
And why?
Constantly.
Why do you think that
Because
was?
of the Absolutely, because of the gender conditioning, the untreated trauma. For me, it was untreated mental health stuff
Mhm.
as well. And so it's like, I would want the closeness, and then it would just, things would internally would rupture for me, and then you'd have a trauma response. And that's what you see happening in relationships all the time. You have a fight response.
Mhm.
Well, then, if a man has his conditioning and his conditioned response, a fight
Mhm.
response is probably going to lead to anger. and
Mhm.
acting out. But then you could have a freeze response and the guy shuts down, or the flight response and he goes into work, or he goes into exercise, or he goes into the basement,
Mm.
watches sports all day, or you can
Yeah.
have the fawning response, which, there's a lot of guys who do the fawning response that, many people kind of tend to think of that's just women who do that. But
Mhm.
I've known a lot of guys who, like, they've lived in deeply abusive relationships
Mhm.
with women who are just total perpetrators, aggressors, and just very, very toxic and unhealthy. And
Mhm.
because they grew up in situations with a parent, oftentimes a mother, who was
Mhm.
also mentally ill, or whatever, that
Mhm.
they shrink. So
Yeah.
6'4" man shrinks from a 5'4" woman who's berating him, calling him a piece of shit, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Right. Can you explain, what fawning means for the listeners?
So there's so
Especially
there's
from, like,
four.
a male perspective?
Usually people think of three kind of trauma responses, but really, as of late, we talk about more like four responses.
Mhm.
And the fourth one is the fawning. And the fawning is exactly what it sounds like. It's this idea that you will do anything to appease the person,
Mhm.
to make peace, to keep
Hmm.
peace, to prevent problems. And it comes from a lot of kids who were the ones who protected their siblings from an abusive parent, and so they learn this idea. And so, of course, the fawning response bridges beautifully into codependent behavior,
Definitely.
and then you begin to create this kind of persona, or this psychic
Mhm.
response to any kind of conflict, you know to any kind of tension, any kind communication challenges, and it's just fawning, and it's just, oh, whatever, yeah, whatever, whatever
Mhm.
you need, or
Mhm.
you just shut down because, like, the person's yelling at you, and you don't. And then, of course, the fawning can lead to you know people just exploding.
I was gonna ask, do you think that, like, chronic fawning would lead to the other partner, male or female, becoming more of an aggressor?
Well, I love the Cartman triangle,
Mhm.
because, for people who aren't familiar with it, it was.
Chronic fawning behavior would lead to a partner becoming more aggressive, like looking at the person like a doormat
Oh, of
or
course, of
yeah.
course. I mean, and I was, I like the Cartman triangle. The rest It has the rescuer, the perpetrator, and the victim. And
Mm,
the idea is that we all kind of move between the three, but we kind of stay in one primary spot.
mhm,
And in unhealthy, abusive, toxic relationships, what happens is the role that you're playing tends to intensify. If you are kind of active in the perpetrator role just a little bit, like, you react to something your partner does. And if they don't respond in a way that makes it clear that your reaction is not healthy, is not appropriate, is not respectful, and is not okay, then there's permission. And then sometimes then you reinforce the role and you stay in that role, and the role intensifies. And so what
mhm,
happens is you see these roles become more and more rigid, more calcified, kind of, for the individual. So absolutely, it can lead to increased tension, increased aggression, increased abuse,
mhm,
violence, all of it.
mhm,
And that's what makes relationships so challenging at times, so, like, befuddling,
mm.
if I could use such a word.
You just did.
I did. I'm using it.
You did.
It's a good one. But in all seriousness, because it's just like, God, it really can be crazy making to be in a really unhealthy relationship, and then you're
Yeah.
trying to get healthy. And the challenge is that, well, I mean, again, it goes back to the two garbage trucks colliding.
Mhm,
Like, a person who's got their stuff together doesn't tend to stay in a relationship with somebody who's really kind of
Yeah.
That's not meant to like blame the individual. It's just about taking responsibility. It's kind of like
Sure.
clean up your dump truck
Mhm.
first,
Mhm.
and just figure out like what's going on. Always
Yeah.
keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
And if your safety is ever compromised, then it's like, what's the relationship worth?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I was just talking to a client about it this morning, and I was sharing with them that when I was working at the treatment center, the amount of people that I saw run off together, and
Oh, yeah.
and we say it, right? This is going to be a disaster. Stay out of a relationship for a year or two or three, whatever it is, but it's like again, it's like those feelings, and this is not just for people who get sober, but the feeling of meeting someone and getting all those feelings again and those butterflies back and the excitement or being physically attracted to them. It's like, okay, let me present my stage version. Let the other
Right.
person present their stage version. We all interview quite well, and let's run with this.
Right.
And it's fucking disaster.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really what it comes down to. It's kind of it's a naivete
Mhm.
on the part of some people. It's an arrogance on the part of some people that basically says, I can just show up in a relationship
Mhm.
and it's just going to be fine. I don't have
Yeah.
to take care of myself. I don't have to look at my past
Yep.
behaviors. I don't have to clean up my side of the street. I don't have to do all this sort of stuff. And then you have the aspect of it that is driven by gender conditioning. I mean,
Mhm.
like you bring up the treatment centers part, and I'm like, when I work with treatment programs and I consult with them, I'm just kind of like, how much energy are you spending trying to keep your male and female clients away from each other?
You actually asked them that?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely, because my recommendations always don't do that. Have male programming and have female programming, and don't have it in a way that it's mixed. It's not healthy. It's not recommended. It's certainly not recommended for trauma work. And yet people, do it, continue to do it.
Hmm.
And it's just kind of like, what is the stress on the staff? What is the stress on the organization? And what is the stress and the impact on your clients? I mean, show me in one of those three areas how that works. Well,
I never really thought of it that way. It's true. It was definitely not helpful for me when I was in rehab.
I've never
I
seen
didn't.
it be helpful.
So why do you think they continue to do it?
I don't know. Why do people drink themselves to death? I mean, it's just kind of like, I mean, you just do what you do. And if you don't, it hasn't been questioned like strongly, and it, like the industry, the field has
Mm,
not collectively questioned that practice enough to really force people to rethink it.
hmm,
And as a result, it just tends to be the default. And, financially,
hmm.
that drives it. I mean,
Yeah,
for a
like a
lot of
business.
people, it's a
Yeah.
financial decision, but it's a short-sighted financial decision. Those folks hooking up in treatment and doing what they do, I mean, that's fine. That's what's not fine, but I mean, it's like that's what happens. That's what you should expect
Part
people
of
to
it.
do. And
Yeah.
people walking around in society, they want connection. We
Yeah.
we want connection. I just think we want it to be easy, and like we always want it to be the other person's responsibility.
Mm,
You changed to make me happy. You
mhm.
didn't change, and so now I'm unhappy, and then that's why the relationship failed. So you're the asshole no matter what. And it's just like that's not the truth of relationships. It's a
Mhm.
we're both 100% responsible, and people tend to find each other. There is a spiritual component to it, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, it's because it's kind of like it's wild how people find, like, I'll use an example. It's not a great example in some ways just because it's a very painful one,
Mhm.
but like people who get into abusive relationships and then they finally get out, do you know the likelihood that they're going to find another abusive relationship?
Mhm.
Like,
Hi.
that's very, very high.
Mhm.
Where do they come from? And so, there are those of us who, and I certainly put myself in this camp who believe like all relationships are for spiritual growth.
Mm.
And we either learn what we're supposed to learn in the relationship on this earth, or maybe the next time around, or next
Mm.
place or planet, or I don't
What do
know.
you think about that though? That concept from like an attachment lens. So, that's the bulk of the work that I do with my clients, male or female, is this idea of this kind of like subconscious framework for love developed at a very young age based on the love that your parents or primary caregivers showed you. So, when you're kind of looking at this cycle of like why would somebody continue to pick abusive partners, do you think that attachment trauma has anything to do with that?
100%. I think attachment theory, attachment trauma, attachment therapy is like one of the greatest things in
Mhm,
the history of human relationships. I mean,
mhm,
understanding your attachment patterns, understanding how that shows up, because it shows up in every part of your life. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a big component. I think we intuitively sense people in our connection and how they attach and how they're gonna attach. I mean, I have chosen women who are emotionally unavailable every relationship I've had, and they had certain personalities. Now, to say that, like, is my wife emotionally unavailable? No, but
mhm,
if you were to describe how a man shows up in a relationship and how a woman shows up in a relationship, I'd be the woman.
mhm.
Which a lot of men, that's their deal, especially a lot of men in recovery, because we tend to be higher on sensitivity, higher on emotionality. And then if you can't accept that about yourself, if you can't honor that about yourself, you're going to fight that in your relationships and you are going to lose.
Higher than compared to other men or higher than women?
Higher than compared to other men, but like also compared to a lot of the women we date,
Mhm,
if we're heterosexual, you know what I mean?
mhm,
But as you know, attachment isn't about sexual orientation. And so,
mhm.
a gay man is going to find a gay man in recovery is likely going to find, you know, another gay man, but
Yeah,
it's going to be a
dynamic.
similar deal, a similar
Mhm,
energy and dynamic,
mhm,
that exists. And so my wife and I have had to do a lot of work like around that. And like she's
mhm.
had, because she is definitely an avoidant. So she's had to learn to come closer.
Mhm,
And I am the gift of being the anxious avoidant, the
mhm,
disorganized. And so, yes, sometimes the answer is to come close, and sometimes the answer is to stand in the space
mhm.
of separation and deal with the anxiety of that. But that kind of internal awareness, that's critical for a healthy relationship. And most people don't have it. We don't teach this stuff in schools yet, which is absolutely freaking ridiculous.
Mhm,
Like it's a that we're
mhm.
so worried about goddamn multiplication tables and we don't teach kids about attachment and healthy
Mhm.
relationship and conflict resolution.
It's true.
I've sent multiple emails to the principals of my daughter's schools.
I'm sure you have.
And very friendly emails, but nothing, nothing,
Hmm.
no real response. No, that we're doing that. Yeah, we're
Right,
doing that. We have counselors at the schools. I'm like,
right.
yes, you have a passive resource.
Yeah.
If they decide they need help, they can go to the counselor. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about figuring out a way so all kids get this information and have it as they're trying to navigate how to have relationships and do it in a healthy way instead of repeating all the bullshit that the previous generation had to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, like we are not learning as a society in this regard. We've got tons of podcasts, no offense. We've got tons of podcasts and books and this. We
Mhm,
are awash in
mhm.
the information, but when it comes to actually internalizing it and living it and practicing it, it's a very, very small percentage. Because again, people want to believe, I listen to all these podcasts. Okay, great. How's your
Mhm,
behavior changed?
mhm.
My
Yeah.
behavior? Well, what do you mean? It's the difference between passively taking something in and proactively implementing it into your life, which is hard. And I'm a little cynical about it because I just see it. I see it everywhere. I think we're on a trajectory of progress. I think things are improving greatly. But when it comes to like just general awareness of how we do relationships and especially
Mhm.
like how gender conditioning drives it,
Mhm.
God, I think we've got a long, long way to go.
Yeah. I really like that too, the passive versus proactive, you know?
Yeah. That's why like
And
I have a
Mhm.
there's this group that I'm not a group, but it's a social media platform that I'm a part of. It's new. It's called Cadre. And I encourage your listeners to check it out. It's an app
Mhm.
and it's only focused on personal growth. And they have a number of contributors. I'm one of them who we just share different things. And so every Saturday I'm live, but then my stuff is available afterwards. But I always try to give actionable steps at
Yeah.
the end of everything I do, which is only
Mm.
5 to 10 minutes. I call it the practical and tactical because it's like whatever I'm saying, like if you don't have something to practice, if you don't have something to like just change your behavior or do something just a little bit differently,
Yeah. Yeah.
how does that help?
We go back to factory setting really quick.
We go back. That's well said.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
really
well
quick.
said. We absolutely do. And it's not like a judgment
Mhm.
and it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's
Mhm.
just know that the forces inside of you are much stronger than a 1 hour podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And, circling back to this idea of attachment and you sharing your history of having a pattern of dating emotionally unavailable slash avoidant women, looking back now, obviously with a mind full of knowledge and hindsight, but why, and more for the listeners, because I work with a lot of people who are very frustrated about dating the same person over and over and over again. Looking back at your childhood or growing up, why do you think that that was a pattern for you? Why do you think that you were attracted to that?
Well, that's a little more complicated, and I sometimes even wonder how important of a question it is. I mean, is it important for me to know I grew up in an alcoholic home? Sure. Is it
Mhm,
important to know that I grew up in violence? Yes. Is it important to know that my mom struggled with her own codependency in being able to protect us from my dad? Like, yes, 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 all of that, right?
mhm,
Has like real validity value, but like I don't know where it comes from. I've watched some of the videos around attachment and like you see attachment styles like really early in babies and you see
mhm,
it like so it's like what is it? Is it birth order? Is it
mhm,
gender conditioning? Is it the connection to which parent, same sex
mhm,
parent to the the so I don't know. It's a mixture of all of those
mhm,
factors. But what I do know, Jess, is I was an anxious avoidant starting around 3 or 4 years old.
mhm,
And I know that when it comes to attachment, like my daughter, I feel really, really blessed to say my daughter, I think, has pretty healthy attachment,
mhm,
which is really cool because her mom and I worked hard for her to have that.
mhm,
But she's still, I mean, she's still going to skew towards something, right? I
mhm.
mean, she's going to have something. It's just not going to be the way that it looks for people like me, where it's like pretty entrenched.
Right.
Um, but I mean, I still feel the impact of the kind of disorganized attachment stuff on a regular basis. I really need to be aware of it in my relationships and kind of how I kind of go into them, friendships, other
Mhm,
relationships, and just kind of notice the energy that,
mhm.
that comes up.
I think I get very curious from a place of not necessarily like chicken or the egg, because you're right. Like in essence, it happened. Does it really matter? No. But from like a curiosity perspective, it's more along the lines of, especially when I'm working with people to help them to be able to recognize their own patterns, it's more along the lines of what happens for you when you would, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but date someone who was almost too emotionally available. Because that's really where I see the attachment wounds start to come up. So you say you have this pattern of dating emotionally unavailable or more distant women. What happens when it's a woman near you that is like really connected to her emotions and is kind of like all over you? What happens
I'm not
inside?
interested.
You're not interested.
I mean, like that's the thing I think a lot of us do, right? I
Mm,
mean, like we have it's the way the magnets work. And so like yeah, I mean, like if you when I was younger, if you were like emotionally available or even kind of healthy, like what is wrong with you or what is wrong with me? And there's a dynamic missing for me in that relationship that I'm either going to try to create unconsciously
yes.
or I'm just going to say see ya or I'm
And
just going to blow
me,
up the relationship, which is what
yeah.
in particular a lot of guys do because they are not internally aware. And so it's like, or don't necessarily know how to do it with integrity, right? Oh,
Hmm.
I'm not. I'm not really. I thought we were vibing. Not really that interested anymore.
Hmm.
Thanks so much for spending time together. And see ya. No.
Right.
And it's like,
But
but
don't you think that's a result of the framework created in childhood?
it's
Like,
oh
wouldn't
for
that
sure.
mean for a person that they like in my home growing up, there was no violence, I never went without, beautiful home, but the idea of emotional connection was not there, right? The
Right.
the warm, fuzzy dad, the emotional dad, the warm, fuzzy mother was not there. So, for me, growing up, when I would have people be very warm and fuzzy around me, my nervous system would shut down. I didn't know what to do with that.
Sure.
I'd never seen a man behave that way, I'd never really seen a woman behave that way. And then I started to realize, like, okay, this is gonna be a problem if I don't start looking at this. It was also pointing to my own level of vulnerability. I had no idea how to go within. I had no idea how to go deeper than the surface.
Well, I think it's that idea of like people sometimes say like what you just said, right? I mean, like they're like, oh well, especially after hearing me describe my home, right? Mine was
Mhm,
like chaotic and
mhm,
toxic and angry and violent. Oh, but I didn't have that, right? But
mm,
emotional repression, the opposite side of that,
mhm.
can be like really
Just
challenging. Really,
just
really,
as
because it's
challenging.
like I never know how you feel. I never know what's going on. And look, human beings are emotional people. So we
Mhm,
either express them,
mhm,
repress them,
mhm,
or we do something with them. And
mhm.
so, like, for instance, like there are people that I have known have been with their families, and like you walk in and like they'll tell you how great their families are. You walk in and it's like, your mom is pissed.
Yeah,
And I can tell your mom is pissed.
yeah,
And listen to how she's interacting. God damn, that is brutal,
yeah.
right? Even
Yeah, you
though
get so used
even
to
though
it.
she does her gender conditioned phony smile, right? Because
Mhm,
women are
mhm,
conditioned to smile through everything.
mhm.
That's why I'm very intrigued by this movie coming out or that's out called Night Bitch
I haven't heard of
with
it.
Amy Adams on Hulu. And do y'all get Hulu up there?
I think so,
Okay.
Mr. Americana. I think so.
I don't know.
I like Amy Adams too. I'm gonna check it out.
This looks like this is gonna be
Yeah.
this is gonna put some people very uncomfortable.
There's a couple of those coming out. There's more and more of those types of
Which
movies
is
coming out
good.
right
It's
now. I
good.
like
It's
it.
like
Yeah.
those are the narratives we need that challenge.
Yeah.
The woman at my instructor at the gym this morning, actually, she said, if men got uncomfortable watching Barbie, they're gonna shit themselves watching Night Bitch.
Yeah. I
And
just
that's
watched,
a quote, by the
yeah,
way. I don't
Woman
just
of the
throw out
Hour was another one I just watched, which was pretty good. I think it was called
woman of
that.
the hour.
Woman of the Hour, yeah, with, I can't remember her name, but it was good.
But that's like gender
Yeah.
conditioning kind of taken to an artistic level and doing
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But I think, look, I just think what's most important from my perspective about attachment theory is less about how you grew up and much more about how it's showing up in your life and your relationships and your history of
Mhm.
relationships so that you can do something different. And then to do something different, you usually go into the attachment trauma and the
Yeah.
developmental trauma. And so you do go back
Yeah.
to the past because they're connected.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a synergy between the two, and so one
Agreed. Yeah.
relies on the other for the healing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's also why coaching is becoming so popular lately is because this idea of taking more of a therapeutic approach to attachment or going back. From what I've heard from clients who have spent 3 to 5 years in therapy and they would come work with me to coach with me after, there's too much time spent on the past.
Mm,
Right? And I think it has to be equal parts of exactly like you said, passive versus proactive. There has to be, this and again, not living in judgment or criticism. And I mean, of course, if there's abuse or things that you have to process for sure, but this idea of just acknowledging, right? Like I say this often to my clients that two things can be true at the same time. I can love my dad dearly,
yes.
but I can also acknowledge like the
So
wild
important.
things that he said to me.
Absolutely. So important.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, but also not to stay there, right? Because if I stay there, then what is that going to teach me for future relationships or my current behavior? So it's like, okay, here's what happened. Here's your pattern because of the household. Now, and really just as simple as like who is best suited for you?
Yeah,
We don't date like that. We're like, "Oh, are they gonna pick us? Oh, are we this or are we attracted to them?" But it's like, who does your nervous system feel good around?
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. And you have to be in tuned,
Mhm.
with your body
Mhm.
and your emotional inner self
Yep.
to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
I can answer that question now.
Right.
That's after a lot of work, but it'd be nice for the younger generations to not have to do all that work or have to go through kind of
Yep.
the stuff that, we've gone through to get to a place where they can make healthy
Yep.
relationship decisions. And, like, I think when people meet, they have the best of intentions.
Mm.
But man, if we could just make it like normal for people to say, I'm really having a tough time in this relationship. What's going on with me?
Mhm.
But instead, it's always focused on the other. And so you're focusing on somebody you can't control, you can't change.
Mhm.
And I'll give you a perfect example. Well, I think it's a pretty good example. I was talking to a guy, and he was like, he said, because this is also like probably a whole nother podcast, but the whole kind of language around narcissism, gaslighting, and triggering and trauma and all that stuff, it's gotten so ridiculous and it's so irresponsible in some ways. I'm really, really glad that it's a conversation that's happening, but people are just like throwing stuff out, right?
Mhm.
And so it's not like really, truly trauma informed from my perspective. And so, like, this guy was like telling me, he's like, oh, I went to visit my mom and she was triggering the shit out of me. And I was like, oh, no, she wasn't. He's like, what? I said, no, she wasn't. She
Mhm.
wasn't triggering the shit out of you. You were experiencing triggers from her behavior. And that may seem like semantics,
Mhm.
but I think it's a huge difference in how we have to talk about how these things affect us as
Yeah.
human beings, right? Because what I pointed out to him is I said, hey, if I had been there in Florida with you, I bet all the stuff that was pissing you off and causing you to react and affecting your lighting up your nervous system wouldn't have affected me at all.
Mhm.
So, are you sure that was your mom triggering you? And he's like,
I'm sure
oh.
that conversation triggered him.
Well, we have the kind of relationship where I can be that
Yeah,
honest and upfront, but
yeah.
it's also something because it's like I just truly want people to be free
Mhm.
and feel empowered. And there's nothing empowering by going around saying all these people and these things are triggering me. And that's
Right.
what we're teaching people. We're teaching all these kids, and we're teaching all these people, oh, this is triggering you, this is triggering you. Okay,
Mhm.
just avoid it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't be responsible for that. Don't, just be victimized by all
Mm.
the stimuli and the things out there that are causing you gonna discomfort or pain or any of that stuff. And I don't mean to make light of it.
Mhm.
I have suffered greatly from trauma
Right.
and PTSD, but nobody ever helped me by teaching me that I was a victim to those things.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you're not thoughtful about it. And it doesn't mean that I disregard the fact that he has a history with his mom
Mhm.
and that his history with his mom is something for him to take a look at. But it's also like, to me at least, it feels more empowering to say, wow, my mom was behaving in certain ways, and I really found myself reacting to that internally. And I know that it, is more connected to her past behavior than anything she was doing in the moment.
Mm.
That to me, that's a lot more freeing than being like, I'm a 42-year-old man and I go hang out with my mom and she makes me uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, but I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, like, it depends what stage of change you're in, you
It
know? Like,
does.
there are lots of people, myself included, like, I just even in my 20s, any of the stuff that I looked at in my 30s, I don't even think I was capable of looking at in my I was so sensitive to criticism, to my parents, to anything that I don't even know if I would have and thank God, I think for personal pain, at least in my experience, it's like anytime I would go through this insane amount of pain, it would like unlock a new level of change,
It,
where I'm
it
like,
can.
yeah,
It can, right? I mean, were you already in recovery?
yep. Oh yeah. Yeah,
So
I got
you were
sober for
already
3 months.
disposed toward looking at pain as
Mhm.
something that could help you. But
That's
some
true.
people, they're just in this endless cycle of pain.
Yeah.
And look, I totally agree. I think compassion and empathy are like the greatest tools we can
Mhm.
have. And
Mhm.
so, my comments that I make, part of my frustration though is I don't think we're using empathy and compassion in the way that we're having the conversation in our society around trauma and triggers and all of that. I
Right.
think it's paternalistic.
Mhm.
I think it's insulting
Mhm.
to somebody's ability to care for and protect and take care of themselves. And I think it's infantilizing,
Mm.
even to a degree at times. And so, um, like trigger warnings on movies, yeah, I think that's valuable. When a student can get a professor fired or tries to get a professor fired because they say they were triggered by something the professor did,
Mhm.
I don't know. I'd
Mhm.
certainly want to have a lot more information about that. But, being uncomfortable is a part of life.
Mm. Yeah, it's
And
interesting what you said about, like, recovery earlier too. I think it's a different school. It's a different school of thought, there's a lot of people out there, like and I've worked with some in the therapy space that are totally turned off by the idea of the 12 steps and what we do in recovery, saying that it can be re-traumatizing, which it can be, right? But I think it's so subjective where it's really about, like, there was a level of like radical responsibility that I had to take to get sober. And if I hadn't have had to get sober, I don't think I would have needed a big dose of reality or to take responsibility. I could have just lived in that, like, I don't know, spoiled era and stayed close with my parents and whatever it is. So it is this interesting kind of dynamic of how much sobering information you can digest about yourself. And I think everybody is on a different spectrum when it comes to that.
absolutely, not everybody's ready for the message. And that doesn't mean we stop sharing the message,
Right.
because it's not my job to, again, I go back to compassion and empathy. I can have empathy for my daughter.
Mhm.
I'll give you, I think, a great example of how I think we need to treat our kids and the younger people in this space.
Mhm.
My daughter was playing a volleyball tournament and she was having a really hard time. And I was watching her. She was not playing well. She got off the court. She was really upset. And then she just started going off about all these people were wrong and this and that. And I so badly wanted to be like, honey, you were playing like shit. Like my dad, right? Kind of
Mhm.
channeling immediately that kind
Mhm.
of parenting. But I remembered it. I was like, no, no, no. The first step is empathy.
Mhm.
And so I said, I can see how hard this is for you, honey. And you know what? I could see how hard you were trying. And um I can see what this means to you. And I
Mhm.
hugged her and I held her. So she felt heard,
Mhm.
she felt comforted. And then I said, so can I share some observations with you about your playing?
Mhm.
Yeah. She was open, right? Because she felt heard. And I said, I'm not sure what was going on, but blah, 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 blah. And I said, and if you're having some challenges, I think you need to talk to your coach
Mhm.
if you think that's what was really going on,
Good job, Dad.
right?
Very good job.
Thank you. I was
Mhm.
very proud of myself in that moment. And that's how I try to parent my daughter. And I
Mm.
don't always get that empathy
Mhm.
piece first right. And my wife has been a beautiful, wonderful champion of that. And we try to do that with each other.
Yeah, I was
and
gonna
we
say that's
and we
so important
fail
to
after
each other.
21 years of marriage. We
Yeah.
fail at times,
Yeah.
but I believe that's what we need. Is we need, like, okay, lead with empathy, but
Yeah. Yeah.
don't stop there. Have the tough conversation and say the
Yeah.
things that are uncomfortable and that might push somebody or
Yeah.
challenge somebody to grow. And I just don't think we're doing that as a society
Mhm.
as of late. I think there's this idea of
Mhm.
like, I don't want to sound like one of those ignorant people who's just like, the problem is we're coddling everybody and blah 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 blah. That's not my point.
Right.
And yet at the same time,
Yeah.
there's some
I think
truth.
there's
There's some
a
truth to what that person's
balance.
saying.
Yeah, there's a balance.
There's a
I
balance.
There's a
It's
balance.
a
I have a
balance.
I have a friend of mine, and he's always so worried about, like, interjecting his opinion or telling me, and I stopped him the other day, and I said, "Just so you know, I don't feel that way with you. I don't
Mhm.
feel like you tell me. I actually really value, your ideas on entrepreneurship or business or the podcast or whatever. I'm very open, and if one day I'm not open or I'm having a bad day or I'm feeling sensitive, I'll tell you."
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was
And
this
that's
cool
good. That's good communication. And then that creates
safety.
intimacy and
Yeah.
safety and connection right there because you clarified some things.
Yep.
We don't we don't do that enough. We don't communicate. It's like you
Yep.
said at the very beginning, right? We don't communicate enough.
Mhm.
We communicate without saying shit, right? We communicate without
The
real
worst kind of
vulnerability, right? We
yeah,
just blah blah blah. So
yeah.
empty communication. But
Mhm.
like the real kind of open and honest communication that we need doesn't have to be the only thing in a relationship. I mean,
Mhm.
I used to like I used to do it all the time with my wife and she would just do like this. She'd be like, ah, ah, ah.
It's too
Too
much,
much,
too
too
much.
much, too much opening up. Okay, Jesus, go to a meeting. I know that's hard to believe.
Very. I'm having a tough time swallowing that one. Dan, too much? No. No, no, no. But you're right, whether it's that beautiful example that you just provided with your daughter, or in a relationship, or with friends, or with, in recovery with sponsees, we've either never learned or we've never been taught the art of saying, like, "Hey, would you like me?" I remember when I learned this one, I was blown away. I didn't even know you could do this. Somebody would finish talking and I was like, "Would you like me just to listen to this story, or would you like some feedback at the end of
Yes.
the story?" It fucking
Yes.
it changed the whole game for
Isn't
me.
that amazing?
I didn't know people didn't want feedback.
Isn't
So
that
I just
amazing? And look, and then this is a gendered thing. This is a
Mhm,
gendered component to that story. Is so often you will hear men in particular,
mhm.
but also women say, I just want my guy to listen. And the guy's just like, oh, if you want to keep your woman happy, you just listen. You just need to listen. Stop trying to fix. And I'm like, hey, guess what?
Yeah,
Guys are the exact same way.
yeah.
There are times where I just want to share something and
No
I'm not
feedback,
looking for your feedback. I'm
no
just
feedback.
asking you to hear what I'm saying.
Yep.
And so again,
Mhm,
my wife and I have been through that. Like, I think like really healthy relationships inherently challenge the gender conditioning and
mhm,
force individuals to move outside of that
mhm.
as a result. And so it's like my wife has had to come to realize I'm not a great listener,
Yeah,
and I try to fix Dan's problems all the time.
yeah, yeah.
So
It
there. No.
it's I hope she's listening.
So there, woman.
It's so much less work too when we can just let people be because then, each person also gets to decide, is this, like I said earlier, is this an appropriate person for me? And it doesn't have to be, but you can
Right.
come to that conclusion a lot more quietly than how we've been going about it before, right? All
Yeah.
the coercion and the trying to change them and, just once they become this, I'll become happy. And it's like, what a waste of time. It's like, get quiet, ask questions, pay attention, and if you don't like what you see, walk away.
Love it. I love that.
Just the hard thing is codependents have a terrible time walking
Doing any of those four.
away, because and that's also a perfect example of, I think there's a very big difference between like actually connecting with somebody and feeling addicted to somebody.
And it's, and those of us in recovery,
Yeah. We have to be careful.
we love that addictive energy. I was just talking to a guy yesterday about that. I'm like, dude, I've watched it with you in
Mhm.
everything you do.
Yeah.
And so it's just be mindful. Be
Yep.
mindful of it.
Yep.
Like, oh, you just had a great connection with your
Mhm.
spouse. Okay. Now that doesn't mean you have to hang on to it
Yeah.
and have it exactly the same again the next night,
Yeah.
because that's not necessarily what they want.
Yes.
And that's, like, I think that's part of it too, is like really thinking about the other person, like
Yes.
genuinely thinking about the other person's codependents delude themselves into thinking that they're thinking about the other person,
They're
but they're
not.
not. They're not. They're
They're not.
extremely self-centered, even though they
Yep.
think they're selfless and selfish and not selfish. And that's the challenge. And that's what makes it really hard to help, because
Mhm.
it's like, no, no, like really think of this person as their own individual free self.
Yep.
And then how would you interact with them? They don't need you.
Yep.
You don't need to fix them. They're not broken and you're not God. And I mean, it
What's
can
so
be
confusing
beautiful.
but it's so confusing for codependents, right? Because exactly what you just alluded to, they really think that they are the most selfless givers, and they
Yeah.
think that they're with the ultimate takers, but it's like, no, 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 no. All of your giving has this undercurrent of this hidden motive and this agenda, and if you don't get it, then the nuclear weapon's coming out.
Yeah.
Right? You
And
really wanna get shocked? It's like see a codependent person mad or resentful, and it's like, "Whoa, what
that's
happened
right.
to the stage
Because it's
character?"
a blow up. Because it's all been stuffed
Yeah.
and repressed and all that sort of stuff for so long, as they smile their way through everything, saying, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'm so happy." And it's like, no, you have permission
Mhm.
to be upset. You have permission to get angry. You have
Yeah,
permission to not like this. It's
yeah.
okay. But somewhere they learned, and again, the reason why it's so common for women is it doesn't matter if you're in recovery as a woman. It doesn't matter where you come from. The
Mhm.
conditioning of women, the conditioning of girls
Mhm.
is a setup to be
Yeah.
codependent
Yep.
because of how much we repress women and
Yeah.
their sense of self and their ability to have their own self as opposed to take care of everybody else. And so
Mhm.
then women truly believe, like, how many women do I talk to, do I know who like their whole identity is their kids
Mhm.
and their marriage? And according to them, that's what they want and they're happy.
Mhm.
But are they?
Right.
I mean, but are they? And I think that's the question. And if you don't ever stop long enough to ask yourself, like, am I truly happy? Is
Mhm.
this really what I want? And I'm not suggesting women then need to like leave marriages and just ditch their kids and, go sing at the cabaret or something. I'm just saying, I mean, maybe for a night, but
I'm
it's
gonna be editing so many things out of this episode, I can't wait. It's gonna cost me, like, fucking 4 hours of extra work. I do just and we can start to wrap it up on this, otherwise it's gonna be a fucking 3-hour podcast. This idea of
by the way, the only
yes?
person using the F bomb is the woman.
Oh, people know I swear.
Okay. I'm
I
just
swear.
making,
This
I
is
just want to
this
be
is
clear.
actually, like this is a cleaned up version
This
too.
is tame for
Oh my
Jess.
god, when I was working at the treatment center, it was terrible. I worked with 2 Irish Catholic, straight out of prison counselors who raised me from the ground up, and I just talked like them. It was terrible, it was
That's
terrible.
fantastic.
Yeah,
That's
this is the
fantastic.
classy version. But this idea too of I love what you just said earlier about the we could get so high on a conversation and then expect that same conversation, or that the relationship is only good if it stays on this like buzzing high level. And something that I work so often with my clients on is this window of tolerance, right? Are you able to tolerate your partner being in a bad mood, not wanting to talk, not being busy, whatever it is, right? And codependents really struggle with this idea of I'm an independent person, you're an independent person. We're not always going to be sandwiched together, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything negative about the relationship.
Well, I think that's really great too, because I see here's what I see, and it's almost like its own conversation. Like we have seen so many guys, and I think women too, and a lot of it in recovery, but I don't think it's only I know it's not only in recovery. They've resigned themselves to such unhappy relationships. They've like given up on the possibility. It's like, oh, my partner is this. Oh yeah, we haven't had sex in a year. Yeah, there's this, there's that. I mean, like whatever it is, whatever story they have, we don't talk really anymore, or we never fight because I just tell her she's right, and
Mm,
that's. And I'm like, whatever it is that somebody's experiencing, it makes me incredibly sad to think that people resign themselves to that kind of relationship, to that
mhm,
level of intimacy, that
mhm,
they stop trying. It's like they're roommates,
mhm,
they've
mhm,
become roommates.
mhm. And do you
And
think that's a reflection of somebody's inability to go within, like we were talking about earlier?
I think it's really easy to settle into a safe disconnection.
Mm,
I think it's really easy to allow a relationship to just,
yeah, fizzle.
and then next thing you know, 3 years have gone by, five
Mhm,
years have gone by.
mhm,
I've been there.
mhm,
I've had that kind of, I've watched it kind of happening a little bit, and it's
mhm,
and it's and it's like, is that really what you want?
mm.
Like, is that really what you want for your relationship? And I mean, and there's so many components to that too.
Yeah,
Like I've
that's a
I've, I've
complicated
watched guys. There's this myth out there about guys and counseling and couples counseling and all that stuff. I
Mhm,
can't tell you how many guys I've known who have begged their partners to go to couples counseling,
mhm.
and they refuse.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'm always of the school that, like, I mean, I think gender issues are super important, but I'm sure there's equal amount of frustration on, either party's side, depending on the type of person that you're with. But also like this idea of older generations where at least divorce or separation is more common now and more accepted now. But before that, I mean, I can't remember how many times I've heard like, oh, we're staying together for the kids and we're staying
Yeah.
together for the
Yeah.
grandkids and we're staying together financial reasons, right? Like if you want to talk about gender issues, women couldn't afford to leave 40
Right.
years ago.
Absolutely.
It was a death sentence. You know, you're
Absolutely.
not going to bring 2, 3 kids into a one-bedroom apartment and get paid substantially less than a man would,
And
you
now
know?
guys can't afford to leave.
And now it's changed, now it's different. Listen, before both of us just start getting silly, let's just leave a good thing where it is, you know?
Let's
And
let's let our attachment.
yeah,
Yeah. Let's
yeah, and your internet's crapping out again. Let's just,
God.
yeah, guys, I'm gonna send I think you guys use
Please put my Venmo in the
Venmo.
notes for this podcast.
We're gonna start a GoFundMe account
Oh, there it
for
goes.
Dan who can't afford to pay
Jesus
his
H.
internet
Christ.
bills. He's frozen
What
again,
is that?
but he'll
There
be
it
back
goes.
on.
There it goes. God bless the United States of fiber.
You're
All
the
right.
best, Dan. I love chatting with you.
Oh, it was fun.
Yeah, always fun, always a pleasure. We'll think of some more topics that we can try to stay on track. We're still recording. So, anyways, thank you all for listening. And Dan will be back, and I'm going to spend 4 to 5 hours editing all of his ice chewing.
I hope
Thanks
not.
everyone for listening, and stay tuned to another fun, juicy episode. Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.